Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Bruce Johnston has, of course, made major contributions to the Beach Boys over the years as a member of the band. Starting out in 1965 as an onstage replacement for Brian, he quickly became a contributor vocally on record and a multi-instrumentalist both on record and on stage. He's arranged for the Beach Boys. He eventually produced Beach Boy albums. He's written some great songs for the Beach Boys, including, of course, Disney Girls, The Nearest Faraway Place, Deirdre, Tears in the Morning, others. Bruce's contribution to the Beach Boys has really been phenomenal. But Bruce has also had an interesting career outside the Beach Boys, beginning several years before the band was formed while he was still a student at University High School in West Los Angeles. Now, University High School, of course, was a place well connected to the showbiz industry in Southern California. Among Bruce's classmates were people like Jan Berry, Dean Torrance, Arnie Ginsberg, Kim Foley, Jack Jones was a student around the same time, Nancy Sinatra, Sandra Dee, Annette Funicello. University High School was well connected with show business, and I'm sure that helped give Bruce a bit of a leg up on getting his career started. One of the things that I would still most like to see regarding the Beach Boys is a memoir from Bruce Johnston, not only talking about the Beach Boys, but talking about other projects he's been involved in. I think it would be really fascinating to hear Bruce tell his story. He's a showbiz guy, he's very polished, but also when you listen to him in interviews, he has a little edge. He really sees things in an insightful and complex way. He's not afraid to give himself a little self-criticism, even to criticize the Beach Boys a little bit. I'd also like to see a memoir out of Alan Jardine, by the way. I think for both those guys, I'm not sure if there's a little worry that they might be messing up their daytime gig by doing a memoir, but I would really love to see memoirs out of both those guys, particularly Bruce. Bruce's first appearance on record was on an obscure 45 called She's My Witch by Kip Tyler and the Flips. Bruce appears as a session musician on it. You can't really hear Bruce there, but Bruce connections aside, it's a really cool little record. It starts out like a Link Ray instrumental. You think that's where it's going, but then this rough vocal comes in singing She's My Witch, very simple lyrics, has a beautiful scream in the middle. It's the kind of thing that the Cramps sort of made their career trying to emulate. I could imagine a young John Fogerty hearing it and getting really snapped on by it. It's the kind of record that would be perfect to play at a sort of hipster Halloween party that might end up in a drag race or a rumble. Really cool record, She's My Witch by Kip Tyler from 1958. Around the same time, Bruce also apparently formed a band with Sandy Nelson, the drummer, and Phil Spector called Sleepwalkers that played some gigs but never made any recordings. Bruce's second appearance on vinyl is again as a session player on an American International Records release by the Renegades, Charge and Geronimo. Both of these songs, as well as another song by the Renegades called Ghost Train, were featured in the film The Ghost of Dragstrip Hollow. They're very bizarre, weird little songs, made even weirder by the way they're depicted in the film. Now they're shown being performed in the film. I can't see that Bruce is in the film at all, but he is apparently on the record as a session musician. Bruce does, however, get the first writing credit that I'm aware of in another song that appears in a dance in the film Ghost of Dragstrip Hollow. The song is called I Promise You, and it's a co-write with Judy Harriet, also known as Mouseketeer Judy from the Mickey Mouse Club. It's the kind of simple little song that a lot of songwriters will compose starting out. Difference being that for most songwriters, a song like that gets played in their garage, it maybe gets played at a high school dance, and then it just disappears from their repertoire. With Bruce's connections in show business, he ended up with this very simple early song placed in a film where it's there for all time for anybody to see and hear. Simple, forgettable, very beginner type song. The film itself is very bizarre. As you would guess from the title, it's an American International Pictures movie aimed squarely at teenagers. It exists in this weird nexus of juvenile delinquent film, hot rod film, and monster movie. It features Paul Blaisdell, who did a lot of the monsters for AIP over the years. He appears in a reworked version of the costume used in The She Creature, and at the end is unmasked and actually identified as being Paul Blaisdell. If you read any reviews of the film, you're bound to hear words like idiotic, sophomoric, nonsensical, unfunny, ridiculous. I can't argue with any of those criticisms, but I gotta tell you, it's a movie that I personally really enjoy. There's nothing else quite like it. One thing that's interesting to me about this movie, however, is that unlike the later Beach Party movies, the female characters are actually the ones instigating most of the action. They're the ones drag racing. They're the ones getting into trouble. By the time you get to the Beach Party movies, the female characters basically either approve or disapprove of what the male characters are doing, but don't really initiate any action themselves. I'm not going to call this a feminist film or anything, but it is interesting how things developed as we got into the 60s and sort of in a way regressed. Anyway, it's a ridiculous little film, but I find it to be a lot of fun. After that digression, let's get back to talking about Bruce. July of 1959, Bruce Johnston got his first label credit on a record. On Arwen Records, the A-side was Take This Pearl, the B-side was I Saw Her First. Bruce is credited as writer on the A-side, co-writer on the B-side. The record itself is credited to Bruce and Jerry, Jerry being Jerry Cooper, a high school friend of Bruce's. Arwen Records was owned by Doris Day and Marty Melcher, the mother and stepfather of Terry Melcher, who of course will loom large in Bruce's story a little later on. The record sounds nothing like Bruce Johnston. It's a doo-wop number. It really sounds more like a sluggish version of a Jan and Arnie record. Of course, Arwen Records had had great success with Jan and Arnie in the prior year. They may have been looking for Bruce and Jerry to replicate that success. It didn't happen. The single didn't do anything. Bruce had much more success with the next thing he was involved in, which was the single Teen Beat by Sandy Nelson, which reached number 4 on the Billboard chart in September of 1959. Bruce says that because of the way the record was put together, he really should have been credited as a co-writer with Sandy Nelson and Richard Polidor, but they were too green to know at the time that they should ask for writing credit. Bruce's work was back on the charts early in 1960 when a song he produced for Ron Holden called Love You So reached number 7 on the Billboard chart in April of 1960. During this period, Bruce worked extensively with Ron Holden, producing his album Love You So, which was released in the summer of 1960, and writing or co-writing all but 2 of the album's 11 tracks. Bruce is even pictured on the back cover in 2 little photos. One captioned, "Ron and Bruce listen happily to playback of half the album," and the other captioned, "Ron and Bruce leave the Delphi Donna offices after a good day's work." During this period, Bruce was involved in other production work with Arwen Records, Delphi, and Donna, Donna being an offshoot of Delphi Records, named after Ritchie Valens' hit of the same name. The first proper Bruce Johnston record was released in February 1962 called Do the Surfer Stomp. Now this is only 3 months after the Beach Boys had released Surfin'. It was 7 months before they would chart with Surfin' Safari. So Bruce was an early adopter of surfing as a theme in his music. Do the Surfer Stomp, however, owes nothing to the Beach Boys sound-wise. It's got a heavy guitar in it, but it's not really a Dick Dale type guitar. Got a very sibilant drum in it. Sounds like garage band music, not really what we know as surf music. The vocal, however, is clearly Bruce Johnston. You can hear the distinctive voice we come to know as Bruce Johnston for the first time in Do the Surfer Stomp. This was followed a couple of months later by another Bruce Johnston single, the Soupy Shuffle Stomp, based on the Soupy Shuffle that Soupy Sales would do on his show, which had moved from the Detroit area to Los Angeles in 1960. Again, neither of these singles did much chart-wise, but they clearly sound like Bruce Johnston. June of 1963 saw the release of the first Bruce Johnston album, credited to the Bruce Johnston Surfing Band. Surfer's Pajama Party was recorded live at the Sigma Pi fraternity on the UCLA campus. It consists mostly of frat party favorites like Green Onions and What I'd Say. It does include two Bruce originals, Surfer Stomp and Gee But I'm Lonesome, which he had written for the Ron Holden album. Most of the songs are instrumental, but where there are vocals, they're performed by Bruce. It's a pretty cool album and sounds like it must have been a great party. Interestingly, there's been a lot of confusion about this album because Delphi, seemingly inadvertently, later released an album by the Centurions with the same catalog number and the same cover, even the same track lineup listed on the cover, although the tracks on the Centurions album are not actually those that are listed on the front cover. It's a weird mix-up, has caused a lot of confusion over the years. The next month, July of 1963, saw the release of the first Bruce Johnston-Terry Melcher collaboration. Around this time, both Bruce and Terry had found themselves homes at Columbia Records as staff producers. Now, I'm not sure how they initially met, though with the circles they were moving in and Bruce producing records for Arwen, which was owned by Terry's parents, it would be amazing if they hadn't met. This was their first collaboration, however, on the album Surfin USA, a collection of recent surfing hits, mostly instrumentals, credited to the Hot Doggers, produced by Terry, and with the three vocal songs, Surfin USA, Surfin Safari, and Surfin, all sung by Bruce. It's a kind of a cool thing now to hear Bruce singing these songs so early on. At the time, however, this was kind of inferior product. This was the type of thing that a person would buy because they couldn't afford to go out and buy the original hits, so they would get a cheap package of all the hits together performed by a bunch of nobodies called the Hot Doggers. August of 1963 saw the third Bruce Johnston album released in as many months. This one credited simply to Bruce Johnston, entitled Surfin' Around the World. It's produced by Terry Melcher. It has very much a Beach Boys sound to it, though only 5 of the 11 tracks have vocals, and the backing vocal is by women rather than men. But it's very much in the Beach Boys surfing camp. The instrumentals mostly have place names of surfing hot spots to go with the theme of surfing around the world. It's an enjoyable, if not particularly distinguished album, and one of only 2 full-length albums to date credited to Bruce Johnston. This same month, August of 1963, saw the release of the first Ripcord single. Bruce and Terry were now a team, and this is where the story really gets complicated. We'll have to leave that for another time. I know there are a few things I left out production-wise. There may be some other things that I'm not aware of. If I've left out anything really interesting from this time period, please be sure you let me know. Love to learn more about this stuff. Please like and subscribe. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Bye.